Hi, I'm Kylie, supporting you to make the art you love creating. Today, I want to help you answer the question, what are the best paintbrushes for acrylic and mixed media art? I'm going to explain which paintbrushes I use and why, how you can know which brushes are right for your personal art style, and how to save money on your paintbrushes. We'll look at brush shapes, sizes and brands that are best for acrylic painting and mixed media art forms. By the end of this video, I'll show you how you can put together a set of 20 economical paintbrushes to have all of your mixed media and acrylic art needs covered with an order of priority so that you can build it up gradually if you're just beginning. Firstly, I'll just quickly mention something that may seem a bit obvious before we dive deeper, but by being reminded of this, you can take what I suggest and apply it to your situation and style. And that is, when choosing your paintbrushes, just always keep in front of mind, what size do I like creating and how detailed? So in my case, I like to use a fairly large art journal. My art journal here is an A4 size, which is a letter size, and that is, quite a decent size, which is, similar to some of the canvas sizes really. And I like to work on a medium canvas, which I would be anything from 30 centimetres, 12 inches, right through to the one I've got on the desk here under the paintbrushes, which is 60 centimetres wide and 12 inches. So this is kind of going outside of the frame, but I've laid this down just to show a few examples of using some of the collage. So in terms of brush sizes themselves, I'll be recommending various sizes. However, it's always helpful to know that manufacturers are not consistent. Therefore, in the notes, I will actually mention the width of the brush so that you can just double check it's close to what you're getting. You don't need to be precise, I don't feel anyway, I certainly don't, in that generally, even though manufacturers are all a little bit different, the general principle is the smaller the number, the smaller the size. And I like in most shapes, certainly my favourite paintbrush shapes, I like to have small, medium and large represented. So that would be small is usually like a 2 to 3, medium is usually like a 5 to 6, and large is like a 9 to 10. And then, even extra large, I'd sometimes go up to like a size 24 or something like that, just so that I've got that there. But generally speaking, if you can have those covered, you'll have most strokes that you need ready there for you. So in terms of acrylic painting, it is harder on the brush than watercolour. So whilst these brushes would do watercolour as well, I find that if you're using some of the more beautiful full brushes for watercolour that are a bit more expensive, they will actually spoil faster if you're using them for acrylic paint. So it does seem to me a little bit of a waste of money to spend a lot of money on brushes for acrylic paints. For my experience, I find that I can get just a similar result with an economical option. Now, that brings us to bristles. The natural bristle brushes are often the more expensive ones, and they are very lovely. This is a goat's hair brush. This is a hog brush. That's obviously a lot stiffer than this soft brush. They're absolutely beautiful. They do make lovely textured marks. However, to wash them up, they do not really like the amount of washing that's required to get the acrylic paint out. So I still keep them as a bit of a luxury item, and especially if I'm using, like this one's got walnut ink in it from last week that just stained it. They are nice to have for certain things, but they're not part of the essential set. So in the set that I am recommending, everything here is a synthetic brush. And when it comes to synthetics, you do get a range of types of bristles as well. The firmer, the better for me, and I just find you get a more textural stroke and the paint doesn't sort of mix so much into one another when it's on a stiffer bristle. So the gold coloured bristles are usually a little bit stronger than and not as soft as the white. As you can see, I still have a bit of both, but a golden Taklon tends to be great for having a little bit of body to it. Apart from that, I do, the only other consideration is, and it's not always easy to tell when you're ordering because they don't always say, but I do prefer a plastic handle than wood. Some of the wooden handles are okay because they seal them really well, but other wooden handles, haven't been sealed well, especially on the cheaper products, and they crack. So if I buy, like this is such an old brush, but also really cheap, and that plastic handle just keeps going and going. So if I happen to leave it in the water, it's not going to be a problem. So that's just really the things that to consider overall. And then in terms of diving in, we'll just have a look at the shapes that you've got here. With acrylic painting, and especially with mixed media where you're using a lot of collage and glues and mediums, the acrylic mediums can be difficult to get out of your brushes. So the earlier times when I was just starting with collaging and those kind of mediums that were needed for adhesion, like the matte medium and those kind of products, I did ruin a lot of brushes. I felt like I'd washed and washed and washed, and still the next day it was hard. So now I tend to solve that problem of having to throw that brush out because it's no longer good for acrylic painting by just keeping one brush per medium, and I only ever use that brush for that medium. And that way you're, got a nice new paintbrush here, it's not going to get ruined. So this is an example of a brush that I have used for an acrylic medium, and it has, I've just used it for several months now, still going great. And there's a few tricks to that. But essentially, in brief, it is that I just mainly keep it in water pretty much all of the time. Every time I finished a job, I'll wash it out, I'll tip out the water and get a clean water, and then I'll just pop this back into the fresh water, and that keeps it nice till the next time. It doesn't go hard and brittle. So I'll just list through the brushes that you might need for your acrylic mediums. This is a 1-inch bright brush, and bright just means that you've got the even distance from the width to the height. 1-inch bright for me is perfect for collage. You can get these lovely paddle brushes. This is a Tim Holtz paddle brush which is designed for collage. It does have some advantages in that you look at it, it's got hugely more bristles, so it will pick up more product. However, it is not an inexpensive brush, and probably be 4 to 5 times more than this brush in cost. And I tend to, for my more expensive brushes, I tend to not want to put them into glue. Glue is just so hard to get out. So, and also it has a wooden handle, so leaving it in water isn't the best. So I do have it there, and I do actually enjoy the brush for painting, but I am reluctant to use it for collage. So just a cheap brush. This is a Royal and Langnickel one, which came in a mixed set, and that does the job perfectly for collage. Gesso is very similar, except that it is easier to get out. It's harder to get out than acrylic paint, but it is easier than the glue. So I tend to, this is my current gesso brush. The only reason it's a little different than this one is because the gesso, you're often covering a really large area when you're gessoing, say, a whole canvas or something like that to get it primed. And the smaller the brush, the longer the time that it's going to take. So that probably is a time when something like this Tim Holtz brush could be really handy because it's going to give you more distance. But also I have these are both Holcroft brushes. These are both my this is my existing gesso brush. This is a new one I've just got. But I also, and I really like the Holcroft brushes, but I picked up this extra one because it has, about double the number of bristles, and I know I'll be able to pick up more products with it. So I just leave them aside for gesso. For varnishing, likewise, I'm just showing you 2 different types here. varnish, again, is super difficult to get out of brushes, so I tend to buy the cheapest possible in case they get ruined. This one was $1 from my local hardware store, and it does have a wood handle, but I don't leave them in water because I don't use them often enough. I'm not varnishing that often, so I just have to wash it out really well with detergent several times. I sometimes move over to this one just simply because it holds more product and I can cover a large area more quickly. The reason I've gone up to a wider brush for varnishing is that often you do want to see your paintbrush strokes in your art, but not for your varnish. So the wider the brush, as I'm going down, it's going to give me more width before I have to go down beside it, and therefore less overlapping in between these two brush strokes, and I'll get less paintbrush marks. So those are the brushes that I have for acrylic mediums. In terms of acrylic painting, it's pretty straightforward actually. You just really want a combination of shapes so that you can make different marks. I prefer quite choppy, strong, interesting strokes that are quite rough. I like quite textured work that isn't exacting. So for me, my favourite brushes are these ones here, which these are actually two different types here. This is a bright, as I just showed you, but the flat brush just is the same, only it has extra length, which just means it will pick up more paint. But the ends are square on both, so they do make a similar mark, or the same mark really. So I do use flat and bright brushes interchangeably, so it doesn't matter which one you pick really. In fact, it can be an advantage to pick up more paint, but I tend to be too heavy-handed with my paint anyway, so I find the less load can be a bit of an advantage. I like to see the paper through my work, and sometimes I put so much paint on that it's not, I think afterwards, I wish I hadn't, put quite so much down. So that's just really the only difference between them. And as you can see here, I've got a couple of different sizes. You've always got a few on the go when you're painting, so they tend to double up a little bit, but and I think I had a smaller one as well somewhere, but essentially small, medium and large. And this is a size 6, 8, 10 and it's a 1 inch. I can't remember what size 1 inch is. I'll have it in the notes anyway, but I think it's a 12. So I think what we've got here is a 6, 8, 10 and 12, but essentially it's going to be 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch and 1 inch as your staples, and then you can get a few extras if you want to, but this will give a great start. And then to complement them so that you've got a rounded edge, you could go to your round brush. The round brush is a little bit like using a pencil in that it's got a really, really detailed point. And again, small, medium, large. I think these sizes are a 3, 6 and a 9 from memory. And they also have quite a lot of fullness in the brush, the round brushes. So even though they have the point, you can, when you press down, get quite a lot of paint sort of coming through in quite an organic motion. So they're really quite good for things like hair or waves or curves or, those kind of marks that you want to make that don't have a square edge. If you were just to get this little set here, you could pretty much have most of your basic needs covered. It's from there that you start to get into your luxuries. So really, if you're on a budget and you just want to start off with something small to get started, that's a great set. The next type is called a filbert brush. These are essentially exactly the same as a bright brush, only they have rounded edges. I find the reason I'll pick these up is when I want to get into a corner without actually going over the edge. So they've just got a little bit more precision than a flat, because it's got such a strong shape on the corner. And it's for that reason that I tend to recommend the smaller sizes in these, because when you're wanting precision is usually when you're getting into a detailed space and you want a smaller brush. So in this case, I've used, this is a size 2, this is a size 6, this is a size 12. Really, it doesn't matter too much which the exact sizes are, but represent again your small, medium and large. And if you only to get 2, go for the smaller sizes. The next type is the angle brush or angular brush, or some people call it a shader. I went without this for many years, so it's not essential at all, but it is good for getting into a sharp corner, or for covering, as the name suggests with the shade, covering an area that you want the edge to have some precision to it. So because that bit is the only bit right on the edge, you can get into places without any trouble. And even just apart from that, they make an interesting mark when you lay them down. So again, same reason for the filberts, that when you want to do that, you generally want to go smaller. And I think for these brushes here, I've got a size 2 and a size 4, which is like a 7mm and a 10mm or something like that. So that's also for detailed work. The next 2 brushes they aren't essential, but they do make marks that nothing else seems to be able to achieve easily. And that is the liner brush. And this one is called the mini, this is called mini, but the type of brush is called a spot detailer. Some people just call it detail, some people call it spotter. So these 2 are quite good for very precise movements. In the case of the liner brush, it's actually quite a long one. I've got another one over here. It would be also called a liner brush, which is a lot shorter, as you can see. The reason I like this long one is because the thing that I like to do with them is to achieve a really long continuous line across the surface. And that gives a bit of variety. A lot of mixed media are quite heavy marks, and you sometimes want contrast. So you can load this up with paint and travel it a good long way because it has got so much length. I believe that's around 25 mils long, which is about an inch long, even though it's called a size 4. But if I was to go for this one, which is also a liner, you're not going to be able to get much paint on there, so it's not going to be able to achieve the continuous line that I like it for. So it depends what you're using it for, but that's what I use it for, and that's why I like that one. In terms of the, this is an Art Studio one. The size on the packet said 5/0. They've used all the words here. Mini tight spot detailer, they've called it, but it's just a tiny little point, and you can use this for little dots. And for me, I mostly use it for things like lights in eyes, or the really little details if you're doing petals, like pollen or something like that, and you just want to touch. You can get that same effect with some of these others, like for example the corner of a squarer brush. However, it's very easy to overload the brush and accidentally get too much down, which you can't really do by accident with this. This is another one I got by without for many years, the fan brush, but it's particularly helpful for when you're doing splatters, which is why I got it. It's probably my most expensive brush, I think. It is J. Barrows, so I got that one from Officeworks. I can't honestly remember how much it is, but it's called a Fan Taklon number 12. And when you mix up your acrylic paint with water to being really fluid, and get this really loaded up, and then you just tap it onto the back of your hand, you get a really lovely spray of splatter. And you can achieve that actually with another soft brush. Really, any brush will do that, but I think it's just because of the fan that it kind of gives you more of an arc and more of a spread rather than just in one spot, which actually you may not want at times, but And sometimes it is actually a really lovely way to finish off a painting. So in addition to that, it does make interestingly shaped marks if you kind of lay it down in certain ways. So a bit of a luxury and an extra, but a lot of mixed media artists do like to do splatters, so it can be really handy. So all of the brushes I've mentioned to this point are actually really economical maybe I should say inexpensive compared to the Dina Wakley media brushes. So these are a bit more pricey, but the thing about them is that I do absolutely love them, and they do serve a purpose that I can't seem to achieve with any other brush. Even, I've looked around, I've tried to find it, and I just can't find it. So they just have such a unique brush. So even though they are a little bit more expensive, I'm still including them here because it's good to know about them, and I always look out for them on special. The thing that's so unique about them is the brush itself is really, really firm, but also really springy. And I don't know, I just haven't found that in another brush. I've looked at art stores, I've looked everywhere, simply just because, they're not that easy to get in Australia, which is why I've looked around to see what else is around. So I have to just keep coming back to these. I have used these, not this one, this obviously new, but I have used these over and over, and they do wash up really well. So although they are expensive, the brush will last and last. There are some quality issues with them. As you can see, the top can sometimes fall off. That I've got probably, this is my range of Dina Wakley brushes. Let me have a look. And as you can see, two of them that has happened to out of that many brushes. Essentially, the reason that I've got a few of them is that I love them mostly for dry brush technique. So then they sort of give the bristles stay quite separate, and you get that sort of mark where you can really see the bristles of the brush laying down the paint, and that kind of textured brush stroke, which is why I like them so much. And that works best when there's not a lot of water. So using a dry brush technique, the brush only stays dry for so long until you've got to wet it to wash out the paint to pick up another colour, and so therefore your brush is no longer dry. So that's why I did actually want to have a few. The other thing about them is they really crack. The handle cracks way quicker than any other brush I've had. So I don't know, I mean, it's not a real issue or anything, but you can see how cracked they come. I mean, that is normal for brushes, but all of these brushes have received the same treatment, and really these are the only ones that have had significant cracking. The trick then is, I mean, I try to do this myself. Maybe I haven't done that as well with this one in particular, but I try to put it into water where the water is not going up above the join, which is called the ferrule, not going up above that, and then that way it's not going to get onto the wood. It's kind of difficult because that's only quite a small amount of water, but that is, really the only way that I can try and keep them good as long as possible. A few people I've seen online have suggested wrapping them with washi tape and then sealing it with an acrylic sealer, but I don't care about it enough to go to that trouble. So if you can stretch to it, they are, honestly, I've heard a lot of other people say this as well, one of the best mixed media brushes you'll find. But really, I feel like you can get by with either, whichever size you'd like to work in, but that would be plenty, really. I just, grab these because they're on special, and it's helpful to have a couple of spares. But in terms of cost, I try not to spend more than $3 on a brush. Mostly, a lot of these will be less than that. That's Australian. And if you wait for like a 40% off day at Riot Art and Craft, or Eckersley's often have a sale. Spotlight, Lincraft often have sales. Officeworks doesn't tend to have paintbrush sales, but it can be handy just to pick up the mixed packs. You can really, if you look out for it, save at least half on your brushes, because paintbrushes seem to be one of those things that are often coming up on sale. When you're getting started, you can start out by getting a good range in your mixed pack. I'm sure that's fairly, everyone would know that. But in terms of having tried all the different mixed packs, Royal and Langnickel, they just have the best products and great quality for the price. So if you look for a mixed pack which has generally got a filbert, a bright, a flat, it might even have a detailer and a round in it, you're halfway there, and then you can just fill up the gaps either by looking for another mixed pack or buying them individually. Riot Art and Craft have a lot of great options individually. They sell these Eraldo Di Paolo ones, and those are sold individually. And I got most of, you can see these blue ones here, I got most of them at 50% off, and they turned out to be about $2 Australian each, or $2.50 for the larger ones. So that can be a great way just to supplement your mix pack if you haven't got all the sizes that you want. So my top brands are, in terms of if you're going for value, are Holcroft, Royal and Langnickel, Eraldo Di Paolo, and the Art Studio. The other thing that I haven't really mentioned is these foam brushes. Super cheap from the hardware store. You've probably seen a lot of people painting with them. I'll just mention that the reason that I don't use them very much, I mean I have used them but I'm not a massive fan, is because they actually are so greedy for the paint. So you make up your palette of paint and you put this down and you've got plenty on there, you feel like. You go to put it on the canvas and hardly anything comes out. And so to get something to come out, you pretty much have to saturate this to its full and then scoop up more before it'll come out on your canvas in the way that you want to. And then you end up, all that paint that's in there getting washed down the drain at the end, and it just, that palette of paint I mixed up seems to be gone in a far faster than if I used a different brush. So with the cost of paint, I just don't really like wasting it. Likewise, a lot of people use these catalyst tools for acrylic painting. I think part of the appeal is that you don't have the wash up to worry about, and you don't get things clogged in the anything mediums clogged in the bristles. However, I mean, some people swear by them, but if you can have a look, imagine painting with this and painting with this, to me it just feels clumsy. I find that I just can't get in. Now some people just love that really expressive large kind of feel, but for me I just feel like I can't get the control that I'm comfortable with. I mean, it obviously would be great for going over the top, but it actually has a bit of give, and I prefer my key card, trusty old key card, that has about the right tension that I prefer, and that's what I use for that anyway. So I haven't really gravitated towards that, but I know some people love it, so I just thought it was worth mentioning. A quick recap on the priority order. If you got one for varnish, one for gesso, one for acrylic medium, 3 to 4 flat brushes, and 3 round brushes, you would have all you needed for a good, you could go a long way with that. And then as time comes on, you could just build these ones up here as well, gradually. So I will put more details about these in the notes. Please feel free to subscribe and check out my other videos on the best art supplies for mixed media And this is really designed to help your dollar go further, and also, more importantly, to avoid disappointing results in your art by buying products that aren't actually good value or don't do the job.